So hi.
Hi.
Hi. Good morning.
Good morning. It is actually morning for all three of us.
Uh-huh.
So to start off with, would you both like to just present yourselves, say your names, maybe where you are? Not so much about yourselves, but who you are.
Shall I start, Mark? Okay. I'm Marlene Blumenthal. I live in Cleveland. I trained at the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland. I'm a semi-retired therapist. I worked in schools as a school psychologist. And anything more?
That's fine.
Wife, mother, grandmother, friend, colleague. That's I.
And I'm Mark McConville, also a psychologist, also in Cleveland, and trained as well at the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland. Marlene and I we trained together at the Institute, both when we were pups, right? We were in our maybe early, mid-30s.
Well, I was a little later, yeah. End of 30s, right.
Well, you could have fooled me.
Sweet.
And I'm still practicing as a therapist. I spent a great deal of my career specializing in working with adolescents and their families. As I've gotten older, I don't, the challenge of 13 and 14-year-olds has become too great. So I've moved on to 20-somethings who behave like they're 13 and 14, and who are sort of struggling to launch. And I also have children and grandchildren, and I'm lucky enough that they're all within a few minutes. So I feel very fortunate that way.
Well, the first question is sort of about you two, actually. It's kind of a why are we here together? Because I'm interested in knowing what you are for each other or to each other.
Oh my. Oh, don't have time for that. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, we do. That's what it's for.
I could
I'm
say
thinking of how many times a student in a training or a workshop said, well, wait, you're not married?
Oh, and Ruella Frank for sure thought we were married when I saw her at Asilomar. I was shocked. I mean, I guess I wasn't really surprised when I thought about it, but the initial was shocking. But I actually like that.
Yeah.
You've often referred to Barbara Fields and me as your, how did you say it, your professional wives or something like that. I can't remember what it was. And I always felt
no, I never said anything like that.
Something like that, partners or something. But I
patriarchal. You're my dear trusted colleagues.
Well, I always felt really flattered by that. It's just a privilege to have been connected to you and related to you and mentored by you and be your friend and have you be mine.
As I said, I'm so glad that I'm beyond the stage where embarrassment is possible. and you know, I have the same kind of feelings about you. But Heather, to answer your question, I mean, Marlene, I have a version of an answer. You may have a different take, but we met in the Gestalt training program, discovered that we both worked with adolescents, she in a school system, me in a private practice, and I also was doing some consulting with schools. And we got the brilliant idea at some point of offering a workshop in working with adolescents. And there really hadn't been any such thing, at least at the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland. And it turned out, I mean, this is, if I have, when I look back at my life and I think, what native skill did I bring to this whole thing that helped to make it work? It's that I have an intuition for finding people that have what I don't have, and that sort of somehow make me more complete. And Marlene, I'm a talker and an entertainer. Um, as as my wife says, she says, "Mark, you're funny. You're just not as funny as you think you are," which is probably true. And Marlene is just an incredibly talented organizer. She's someone that sees the whole field. If we have a room of students, I will miss part of what's going on. I tend to get myopic. I get excited about my ideas or what I'm saying, and Marlene will notice every corner of the room, what's happening. She'll stop the action, attend to the process. So I have felt I felt like we were sort of made for each other when it came to teaching. Um, I know she certainly made me twice as competent as I ever would have been on my own.
I get so overwhelmed when you say that, Mark. It brings tears to my eyes.
It's just true.
Well, you support me even in this moment to see some of the things that I do that I'm unaware of. But I mean, you've said this over the years, and Mark, I think I agree the part that we kind of compliment each other a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Mark is comfortable as a speaker, or at least you look comfortable as a speaker and teacher with tremendous humor and insight. And that's never been my strength. Even now in this moment, it's hard for me to kind of find the words and say clearly what I want to say. But you help me to see how we balance each other. I used to want to be a speaker. I want to be an entertainer, and it just isn't my thing. And you help me appreciate how I can hold the space and the ground. And I do attend to people, and that's what interests me. So we have balance. But my admiration for your development of theory, of the development of adolescent theory in particular, how I admire how you formed that in the process of your teaching. I mean, we did those workshops for therapists who work with adolescents. Some hadn't, but wanted to, and many had. How you developed your theory over time through those 7, 8, 9, I don't know how many years we did those workshops.
Yeah.
It was just incredible, and you produced that incredible first book. Just amazing. And now your second book on what you just described is working with the 20-year-olds who are like younger in some ways,
Yeah.
developmentally.
You say 22 going on 16.
Yeah, just brilliant. And I mean, I have so much admiration for you with that. And I've loved being part of the process along the way, reading some of the drafts. And you helped me to write. I forgot that part. When I first did my first my publication, an article on learning disabilities from a Gestalt perspective, and you went over it with a fine-tooth comb and helped me organize the writing. I'm just so grateful. And I've taken those skills and with each article.
I remember that. My favorite idea from that article was, what if we took these kids who are medicated and we unmedicated them and we medicate all the adults in their environment? We would probably see better results than medicating the child, him or herself.
Yeah, I got a lot of pushback on that statement. And it was really how I felt in my core, and the people I worked with in the schools often felt that way as well. I mean, we were really kid advocates. Yeah, I think that's one of those things I really value about you, Mark. I mean, you really, really loved the adolescents you work with. And I did too. And we always look for the good stuff in them, the strengths.
Yeah, you're right. I had a lot of investment. And when I looked back and tried to sort of make sense of it, like what's been the organizing theme of my professional life, the closest I've come is that I tried to become the adult who was missing in my own growing up years. And that makes it just feels, that rings true when I say that.
Well, I wonder if we should mention, well, I'd like to mention that as part of those workshops we did, is this okay, Heather, to go ahead with this?
That's fine. That's fine. I said this is you guys.
Part of those workshops that I loved was we would do a fishbowl where Mark and I started out, and then I had to eventually back out when my own clients were in there. But we would recruit some teenagers to talk about their experience in therapy. And that, to me, was the highlight of those works. One of the highlights of
we would make the attendees, the adult therapist attendees at the workshop, they would sit around the perimeter of the room and they had to just shut up and listen. And it didn't take much to get these kids talking with great candor about how rarely they felt they could trust the adult, how often they felt that confidentiality had been breached. It was really stunning. It was so enlightening.
What was enlightening for me was towards the end of those workshops, there was one of my clients was in it, and I was standing way outside, almost out the door, listening in. And that's when I determined it was time to stop working so much with adolescents, because I don't know if it were she or one of the other participants, but they said, well, I don't know, I went into therapy and the woman was this old gray-haired woman. And I thought, oh no, that's me now. And so that was about the shift in my practice as well. I stopped really seeing a lot of adolescents and started seeing more adult women and more couples and a lot of families. And so I learned a lot in those days about myself as well.
Well, when you say learned about yourself, this is a question that we are asking in all of the sessions. So about yourself, who are you? Who are each of you as human beings? Who are you as people? Your passions obviously are coming out through the work, but some of your qualities, your interests, your drives, who are you? You can contradict each other too, that's fine.
Your turn.
What matters most to me in life, I have 2 children who are adults, and my son has 3 boys. The oldest is a junior in college. The youngest is a sophomore in high school. My daughter has 4 girls. The oldest is 11 and a half. The youngest is 5. And they are what I care about. My daughter lives within walking distance. In fact, during this pandemic, she has an MBA. She works for Nestle. And with 4 kids at home, she walks to our house and goes up to the 3rd floor to what was her brother's old bedroom suite with a little built-in desk, and that becomes her home office. So I get to see her every morning. My wife gets to have lunch with her every day. That's the high point for me of this pandemic, was going over to their house, sitting on 2 lawn chairs in the driveway and watching these 4 girls, 2 of them practicing soccer, very, very serious athletes. The other one experimenting with boats made out of tinfoil, and just watching them and seeing their development. It's when I think now of, like, at my age, I am no longer afraid of death. When I was a young man, I was terrified of the thought of not existing. But for me, that fear has transformed into sadness when I think of the things that I will miss. I think, oh, I want to see her graduate. Oh, if I could just see her find a partner in life. If I could just see these children have children. That's what matters to me more than anything. In my work, I still look forward to most clients. And I'm at a stage in my career where I can kind of vet clients. And, you know, if it's a contentious divorce, I want nothing to do with it. It's too painful. And what I love are seeing young people where what's missing for them is an adult who gets them and helps them find language and shift their framing of themselves from shameful or inadequate or insufficient into seeing um, the beauty and the heroism and the dignity in what they bring. And I just being part of that process, you know, if I have a couple of those a day when I leave the office, I just feel so good about what I do. I've done a lot of for a private practitioner who's not an academic. I've done a lot of writing, and in a way, it's sort of like a hobby. It's not really that important. Um, I started this in grad school, where they encouraged us to have this very sort of, yeah. My degree was in existential phenomenology, and so the whole Husserlian idea of bracketing. Don't think you know anything. I had a professor of psychotherapy that said, every time you sit down with a client, forget everything you think you know. Imagine that this is the first client in the history of psychotherapy, and you are the first therapist, and your task is to invent something that we can call therapy, just you and this individual. So that idea of this sort of clean, open mind um, has been so useful. And what that led me to do, and they encouraged us in graduate school, is to journal. And the idea of the journaling was you're attempting to integrate what you've read, what you've heard in lectures, what you've learned from clients, what you're reflecting on your own craziness. And I have a stack of notebooks like this in my office. And the books that I wrote, I never set out to write a book. I set out to figure out how the hell do you do something therapeutic with a 14-year-old? I read everything, every bit of literature that was available at that time. John Meek's The Fragile Alliance was very useful. Some family therapy was useful, but really there wasn't much. And most of what was out that I read, it was words. It was just wah, wah, wah. And so I set out to figure out, well, how do I make a difference in these kids' lives? And that's what my journaling would be about. I would write about, oh, I saw this kid yesterday, and what the hell is going on in his life, or what the hell went on between us? And I would just explore these open-ended questions. And at some point, after years, it was like, oh, wait a minute. I'm starting to figure some things out. This could actually be a book, right? The book I just published, titled Failure to Launch, it's a book for parents. Why your 20-something hasn't grown up and how you can help. That was another one of those. I started getting more and more referrals of these 20-somethings who just were teenagers, and all the issues were very adolescent. And, you know, there was no sufficient therapeutic model, because you'd take them into individual therapy and you'd go round and round. I called it merry-go-round therapy. You might have fascinating conversations, but nothing would change in their life. And then I realized what I had learned in family therapy, pulling in the system, somehow getting to the parents, that was absolutely essential. And it was the same sort of thing. I figured out that I'm starting to make a difference, and I'm figuring it out on paper. And then I just needed to put the pieces together, which is the thing Marlene does so well. She sees the organization. I'm a terrible organizer, but I am relentless at it. I stayed with a nascent manuscript for at least 10 years of organizing, reorganizing, elaborating. Oh, this isn't one chapter, this is 2 chapters. Break it up. Oh shit, this isn't 2 chapters, these belong together. This is actually 1 chapter. It was like putting together pieces of a puzzle. And I'm not very good with puzzles, right? So I'm a poor organizer who just until it's organized, I feel kind of crazy. Once the pieces fall into place, I feel so sane and so grounded. And that's what the writing has been about, just trying to make sense of what I'm doing. I guess that's who I am.
So that's quite a bit of how you are as well and who you are.
Yeah.
What about you, Marlene? Marlene wasn't going to be here. Marlene wouldn't come by herself. I've been trying to talk to Marlene on camera since 2014.
I felt badly
So
about that too.
I finally get to ask you, who are you? Who?
Yeah. Well, a lot of what you've said, Mark, has resonated for me, especially about the family piece. Family's always been very important to me. I think a lot of it has to do with my own growing up and how my parents grew up with so much loss in their lives. They were immigrants to the US. And so they've always valued family and taught me the same. And I'll never forget my mother saying when she was aging, they were living in Florida, and she would come to Cleveland to visit, and she'd say, I just want to be with family. That's what's important to me. And that was it's part of my core. So I feel very lucky, even though my children I have one son here in Cleveland, my oldest son, and one son in Miami and one son in California. We communicate regularly. We've managed our differences over the years to find a way somehow now where I hear from them regularly, and it's just, I'm so grateful. So my son in California and his husband come to visit regularly, at least once a year, and they stay for about 10 days. My son in Miami, same, or we see him when we go through Miami on our way to somewhere else. Or I'll just fly down and stay with him. And I have a lovely, a lovely daughter-in-law and a wonderful son-in-law. I just feel so fortunate. And the grandchildren and step-grandchildren, just they're a delight. They're young adults now. And my two granddaughters that I'm very close with is one's talking about graduations, Mark. She graduated from Cornell in December and wanted to, be part of the June graduation. And we all have our reservations at the hotel up there, but Cornell's graduation's been postponed. We don't know if or when it will happen, but I shall be there if it does. And her older sister lives in New York as a fashion designer who's right now on furlough in New York, and but doing some freelance work, making masks actually. So we talk regularly, and it's just they're all gifts to me. And a grandson, my husband's son, is one of these young men who marches to a different drummer, but absolutely brilliant, and always part of family gatherings. So all of that's very important. Relationships. The part about relationships, to me, it's no different. I'm the same person, I hope. I'd like to think. Teaching with my family, with my clients. To me, I think that's what Gestalt therapy has kind of afforded me, is to be present in the moment as a regular person, just who I am. And I really value that. I guess I'd say it a little differently than you do, Mark, but for me, when someone walks into my office, I just want to get to know them, want to know who they are with me, how I impact them, how they impact me, and get to a point where we can kind of share that with each other. And through that, then do what I've learned in all my training and help them to really value themselves and support themselves to do whatever it is that makes it satisfying for them to be in the world. So I, I still see a handful of long-term clients who are really in very good shape, as kind of a life coach, not so much a therapist. And it gives me great pleasure to know how they've navigated, how they accept themselves, rather than one who was very, very, carried a very heavy diagnosis when she first came to see me. Mark had seen her as well years ago, many, many years ago. And I remember my first question to her was, what's your passion in life? And she still tells me about that. And she's living it now. She finally took herself to Morocco. That was her passion from the first time we met many, many years ago. And I mean, I can just feel my heart swelling as I say that. I'm just so pleased to be part of the journey for so many people in life. Just, it makes my eyes well up with tears. It's just, I still love my work. But it's, I don't know, it's just part of my relationships with clients, with people, with friends, with you, Heather, with you, Mark, with all the people I've met in my lifetime. I feel very lucky.
Thank you. So one of the other things that we're interested in asking is, what event or circumstance has shaped you as a person? I mean, there's field theory, there's context, there's all of this stuff, but there are some things that stand out. I'm gonna have to flip my camera off for 1 second, but I am still with you. So
Okay.
Wow, one
event or circumstance, or if there are a couple inseparable, it's kind of, you know, how have they shaped you?
I think one of the biggest things for me that was actually life-changing was starting my training at the Gestalt Institute. That was one, but it's equal to my, I think the people in my life. It's hard to separate the two. I mean, I think I learned a lot through my early training at the Gestalt Institute, about acceptance of self, about influences, about health, about about creative adjustment. I think that it's hard to name an event. It's more a process for me. I think creative adjustment is one of those concepts that I learned about at the Gestalt Institute, but that was also part of what I learned in my own family. There was so much consistency between what I was taught growing up about relationship and about doing the best you can in any given moment and accepting what is and working with it. And it was just reinforced and taught in so many positive ways at the Gestalt Institute, in my training, and again in my doctoral program. So I guess it's a process rather than an event for me. I'm curious about you, Mark.
There was an event for me, and I've spoken with you about it before, and it's something where only later in my life did I sort of put the narrative together. But the event is that in the fall of 1951, there were several employees of the natural gas company left a valve open. If you Google the Brighton explosions, you'll see the story. And whatever it is they had done, quite by accident, it pumped huge quantities of natural gas into a particular community in Brighton, New York, a particular neighborhood. And I think 42 homes caught fire, and 10 or 12 of them completely disintegrated. They imploded. They literally burnt and fell into the foundations. It's the kind of thing that would be worldwide news today. That was before the era of CNN. And there were 2 children killed. And one of them, Billy Moss, was the boy that sat next to me in kindergarten. I was a 4-year-old. I was 4 years old. I was in kindergarten. They pushed kids ahead in those days. And I have no recollection of the event, but I have the story from my mother. My mother's sister she was one of those, she never grew up. She remained financially dependent on her parents her whole life. By the time she was in my life, she was a recovering alcoholic. And since I was the 3rd boy, I sort of went to her. She adopted me. And she drove me up to the site of that neighborhood. She dated firemen. That's what my mother said. My mother said she was furious with her for exposing me to that. I have no recollection of that. What I do have a very clear recollection of, as a child, as a small child, I had a belief. This is before I had, and kids didn't ask kids what they thought, or people didn't ask children what they thought then. The whole notion of good parenting was that you had children who were well behaved. But I had a terror. I had a belief that all houses blew up at some point, that it was just the nature of, I suppose if you live in Florida, hurricanes are going to be somehow part of the ground of your, so I knew it. I knew that all houses blew up. I was a little perplexed that other people didn't seem as concerned about it as I did. I never spoke about it, but every night that I'd go to bed, I'd think, I wonder if tonight's the night. And then I'd get frightened, and I would tiptoe into my parents' room. And this is probably where I first learned finesse. The challenge was to wake up my mother without waking up my father. And if I managed to succeed, she would get up, walk me into the bedroom, and be comforting in some way. If I woke him up, he was like a bear. He was angry. He would bark and growl at me, and he had no place in his life for a scared boy. Now, I'm one of 4 boys. All of us extremely hardworking. We've done well in life. We were very good athletes. My father was a superb athlete. And that's kind of what he expected of us. And I was, as Sonia Nevis, my therapist, said at one point, years later, she listened and said, I see, so you were the girl in your family. And it was one of those kind of interpretations that I felt it was so endearing, because there's just enough truth to it that I really felt seen. But my father, that was not something that endeared me to my father. And so we really had quite an estranged relationship. Although in many ways, he protected us, he educated us. When I got into grad school, and I simply outworked everyone in graduate school. And when I thought, how did I'm a very dreamy, imaginative, disorganized kid. And I thought, oh, I learned that from Dad. That's what he would take us. We would do all the yard work, and he was like a drill sergeant. And when I say it's an event, I really think it's what led me to be kind of an undersupported, anxious, somewhat depressed adolescent, good at covering it up. I've always been sort of socially animated and so on. But I know it's what led me to psychology. And existentialism just lit up like, oh my God, you mean anxiety is just part of being tuned in to the what is? Like, oh, what a relief. I'm not the only one feeling dread. There's this guy Kierkegaard, and he's describing it. Oh my God, I've got company. I felt so like I'd found home. So that was certainly an event that's very clearly demarcated. And I look back and it feels like a series of dominoes. Now, I know, like many life narratives, it has to be an oversimplification, but certainly there's a real thread of truth that runs through that story.
You know, I think I want to add to my answer. Now, I hear what you're saying, because what came up for me as I was listening to you was, I think one of the ground influences for me was the Holocaust and the impact it had on my family and my perspective on the world and my disdain for an inability to dialogue, to have, and to manage conflict, because the cost is so great. And so what was interesting to me was that my mother, who lost most of her family in Europe during World War II, she didn't hold a lot of hate. She just had a lot of regret. And of course, the sense of loss was something that I felt in a nonverbal way my whole life. And I think when I finally came to terms with it and recognized that, the sense of loss that was permeated in kind of the how do you say it, the ether in my home, when I identified that in my 50s, that made a huge difference for me. Because that, I always felt this kind of, and Mark identified it so beautifully when we were in a practicum in our training. And I'll never forget, I was your client, and I was talking about this kind of hole here, this emptiness or this pain. And you said you couldn't, there was something in the way you held me in that session without really knowing what it was about and not trying to analyze it, just being with me. It just stayed with me all these years. And just naming the experience was so powerful for me. So there were just many things that played out for that, but I always carried this loss of something, and I couldn't name it until someone helped me in therapy years later. And then I went to a training at the Pacific Gestalt Institute. And I remember the research that was done with Israelis and Germans and Arabs about dialogue. And it was a German therapist who did this work because she wanted to support dialogue between these people of different, Christian Germans, Jewish Israelis, Palestinian Arabs. And I just couldn't stop crying for days. And I realized that was really core for me, to have people talk to each other rather than fight. And I did my doctoral research was on conflict and conflict management and Gestalt therapy, context styles, and mutuality between mothers and adolescent daughters. Like, all came together for me. So I think that's a longer response about something much bigger than just, and the Gestalt work was what kind of opened a lot of that for me. So yeah, that feels better. I've said that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. One of the other questions that I would ask is, what has Gestalt given to you? I mean, you have these stories, these things that you both bring to it, but what have you taken from it? What has it given you? How has it changed you?
Would you like me to go first, Marlene?
Mhm. Please.
For me, it goes back to this instinct or homing beacon or whatever it is of mine being drawn toward what I didn't have and what I needed to be more whole. I resolved my sort of covertly troubled adolescence by eventually becoming a competent student. And so my graduate work was, I loved it. I love it to this day. And by the time I graduated, I was a very competent, effective student, and I taught. I went through my doctoral work on a teaching fellowship. They elevated one grad student to the faculty for a one-year position. I got that. So I was headed to becoming a university professor. And I had begun to feel good about myself because I felt smart. And I think if I'd followed that path, who knows, but I may have become a narcissistic jerk. And then I ran into Gestalt therapy, and Gestalt therapy was like, we don't give a shit how smart you are. I mean, that's sort of what Gestalt therapy said. Just pay attention, be present. So it taught me the incredibly, the power of that kind of simplicity, of just learning to be in the moment, paying attention to another person. It's not something I knew how to do intuitively. I'd learned how to pay attention to ideas, loved to discuss ideas, and Gestalt therapy really grounded me. That's what it did. And it's really, for me, I'm not a very techniquey person, but the elements of being present, paying attention, being genuine, being authentic, in the moment, contact being kind of the speed of light for therapy, the constant that everything else revolves around. So I feel profoundly grateful to this tradition. Changed my life.
I agree, changed mine too. I'm thinking about how when I was growing up, my mother, because of her history and tremendous loss, she lost her family at the age of 14. She lost her parents. Was very anxious her whole life. I mean, really anxious to the point of some obsessive compulsive qualities, you know. She was always late because she had to go back and check the doors and the iron and all that. She was anxious and worried. And I remember growing up in that milieu and thinking to myself, I don't want to live like that. She's missing life. I remember even as a teenager, she was always worried, whereas I thought, okay, but what about today? What about now? And so I really was very negative towards feeling anxiety, except that I felt it myself as well, obviously. So somehow the work at the Institute for me allowed me to kind of accept anxiety as a creative adjustment. And I understood not only my mother better, but I started to understand myself better. So the idea of creative adjustment to me and a movement towards health really made a difference for me in my own life personally and how I work with people. So I think, we can only do the best we can do in any given moment. And I learned that. And it was in this given moment, who am I in this moment? What do I need? What do I want? How do I impact you? What do you want? Where's your passion? Where's my passion? And that's, for me, so basic in this moment. And it's what supports me today.
Okay. This is a question I don't know how it fits, but I'm interested in asking it. I don't think I've asked it to a duo interview before, but it's about how you have navigated your gendered experience within Gestalt. And I ask it because you said you're misunderstood as a married couple, and that has some implications. And I don't know if it's relevant or if it's important to you, but I felt like asking, how has your different genders, how have you navigated your gendered experience in Gestalt? If that makes sense or is relevant to you.
It's a wonderful, wonderful question. I have been working with a 22-year-old who, maybe 23, who I saw him when he was 13, 14, 15, and he's come back. And he is just sort of emerging to himself as gender queer. And we had the most interesting conversation. I said, your generation is deconstructing the meaning of gender. And what you're doing is very, very important, because the next generation or the generation after that, it's going to be very supportive of people finding their most authentic sense of self. And it also illuminated, I'm proud of what our generation did. And what our generation did derived from the work of feminism, really. That's where the first serious challenging, and I grew up in a man's world. And I was very proud of being one of the McConville boys, one of Frank's boys. I went to college on a golf scholarship. I didn't have language for, when Sonia finally said you're the girl in your family, I was well into my 30s. And by then I could say, oh, this part of me is actually very valuable. I sometimes would joke only with therapist friends, never with my male friends. I'd say, really, I'm a lesbian trapped in a man's body. And so I felt like our generation began to question gender roles. And that's certainly at the Gestalt Institute, so much support. I remember being at a conference once with, and there was a breakout group led by Gordon Wheeler. And it was just male therapists. And Gordon was talking about how the culture has a shame agenda for each gender. And so for women, if you're aggressive, then you're a bitch, a ball breaker. For men, if you're tender-hearted or empathetic, you're kind of a wuss. And so Gordon's kind of going on and giving some of the history of all this. And then he looked around the room. There's maybe a dozen of us. He said, gentlemen, we are the culture's failures. And I remember being so proud of that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what your question evoked in me.
Yeah, the question is more about what does it bring up to you? And that's interesting.
Yeah, for me, having grown up in a family where acceptance of difference was really very important and not very popular. When I was born in 1939, and gender differences, transgender, oh my God, back then, unheard of. So it felt going to the Institute and learning about Gestalt therapy and acceptance of who we are and our experience and how we identify ourselves, it felt like home. I mean, it felt like there was a place for everyone. So I'll never forget in a training program, one man at the end of the program shared with us. I don't know if, Mark, we were working in that same training program, but I was one of the faculty members, and he shared with us that he had been a woman, actually a nun. And some people were surprised. I was a little surprised, but yeah, so it must have been a different program. And it was wonderful, the acceptance of the whole class of 20-some people. You know, it wasn't a shock. It was just, oh, how interesting. And I thought, oh, yeah, this is good. So as I think I had some stereotypes. I was a tomboy. I had some stereotypes about shoulds, how I should be and how I should behave. And I learned a lot about that. So through Gestalt work, and it led to more self-acceptance for me, and of course for others. I mean, that seemed like a natural progression for me. So that's what I love about Gestalt, is it's like who we are is how we identify ourselves as. There's room for acceptance for difference, and I like that. So I've learned a lot, and I've grown and accepted all, you know, kind of learned how to accept the parts of me that maybe are not so popular. I think also the parts of being a woman, and the way some women process, the way some women think, has become okay for me. Whereas maybe in my younger years, I used to fight that. Used to think, you know, how do I fit? And I really like being a woman in this world. And I think it has supported me in who I am, being a woman. And having my own differences within my identity as a woman and in my world with men. And I really love men and the way men are. And men and different kinds of men, and men who identify as men or not. I mean, it's all very rich to me. And I think a lot of that has happened through Gestalt as well.
Okay, well, thank you. The last question that I think I have is about the future, which obviously none of us really know, but I'm curious about where your interest goes, both personally and professionally for Gestalt. Where do you see yourselves going? Where are you going together? Are you parting ways? And where do you think Gestalt can go, or what its place might be in what's coming up?
I like our values around dialogue and the way we manage conflict and the way we support difference. And I see a lot more of the world espousing this, the way we look at things. And I also see the emergence of the other side. And we know how to hold difference. And I think we have that to offer the world. And I think just in how we are with each other, changing the world one at a time, but also we need to support some bigger social movements. Because I think we have a way of holding difference and appreciating difference that can bring people a more peaceful way of life. but that's my dream. That's my wish.
And that's valid. That was part of
I
the
always
question.
have trouble with questions about the future. And I'm uncertain. I think at one time, I think when Gestalt therapy was born, it was a kind of bastion of radical humanism. But what has happened over the course of my career, I think more and more it's been absorbed into the broader spectrum of psychotherapy. And so people will describe, oh, this kind of therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. So what the heck is that? And they describe it, and I'm thinking, oh, that's, you know, we are being absorbed into other kinds of, we're helping to humanize the world of psychotherapy. I'm not sure the wider world that we're doing that great a job. When I look at the political situation in the United States and many other countries, it's just become horrifying. But I think, I don't know, we have to hold our ground. I like, Marlene, your one situation, one relationship, one moment at a time. I don't know what the future is, Heather.
No, I actually wasn't
We can
expecting either of you to really know. I was interested where your curiosity went.
Yeah. Wow.
It kind of feels like you're dealing with a troubled adolescent in the present, that maybe you can help orient towards a future where it doesn't self-destruct.
Yeah. My own energies have been absorbed very much in the Failure to Launch book, which has gotten a lot of good press and reviews, and I'm hearing from people from all over the country. And so I'm having fun. I told Marlene, I really thought I had all my narcissism had been therapized away. That I could care less about, you know, fame and glory. But I must admit, it's been kind of titillating, you know, to have people interviewing me and stuff like that. I'm enjoying it more than I should, is what I think. But that's where my immediate future is, just kind of enjoying that process. It's sort of, I don't name Gestalt in it, but if you read it, you see it's shaped, you know, because I'm speaking to parents, and so I avoid all technical kinds of references, but I'm clearly getting them to look at their relationship with their struggling 20-something and to humanize it, to be more understanding, to be more compassionate. Then I make that argument. I say, look, if someone's asking you to change, don't they have a better chance if you feel really understood by them? I know if I don't feel that you get me, then I'm not that interested in what you're going to tell me to do. But your 20-something is the same way. You've got to understand what it's like to be in their shoes. So certainly Gestalt shaped everything that's in that book.
What I love about how you write in that book and elsewhere as well is it's just how you talk. It's how you are with clients. And, you know, we've done some co-therapy together over the years, and I've actually seen Mark in the room with a family or with parents, and the writing is just who you are, Mark. It's beautiful. Lovely. I'm preoccupied these days with growing older gracefully. I just had a valve replacement in my heart, which has given me 15 years of renewed energy. I haven't felt this much energy in probably 10, 15 years. And so I want to be very present and alive right now and do what I can to contribute to the world in small ways. So I guess maybe this interview is part of it, because I wouldn't have done this, Heather, 10 years ago. I
Okay.
was way too shy to do it, and figure I didn't have anything to say anyhow. So now I know I have something to say, but it's just my stuff, you know, and I want to be here, so I want to contribute, and up until the very last minute.
Thank you. And I appreciate you both, and I've really enjoyed this. And I hope you do get to enjoy. I hope that is the future. I hope you get to enjoy yourselves and what you do and what you're contributing. And
Thank you for
Thank
doing
you.
this
so
project. I just want
thank
to
you
thank
guys for,
you. It's really very special what you've taken on here to communicate just people who we are in our real lives, in our homes, or in our offices, and who we are. And
thank you. It's actually been very convenient, this whole pandemic thing. It's been very conducive to allowing this project to happen. Yeah, so unless there's anything that either of you would like to add.
Well, I want to know, will my great-great-grandchildren have access to this video?
Well, it'll be on the internet, so it will never die. Once we hit share,
That's all I've ever wanted, Heather, was immortality.
You've just become immortal, both of you.
wow,
This part of you will live forever.
that's a little scary. But grateful to you, Mark. It's always fun to be with you, and
Of course.
I hope you learn something more about you when we're together like this. Dialogue, really sweet.
Marlene and I are still part of a therapist consultation group. We meet about once a month, 5 of us, and it's wonderful. We continue to learn from each other. We remain students forever.
And have some
Great.
fun while we're at it.
Yeah, I can tell you have fun, and I enjoy seeing the two of you. It's been lovely to meet you.
Well, thanks so much.
So thank you. If that's okay, I will stop the recording here.
Thank you, Heather.